project undertaken by the firm, working closely with clients to ensure the successful execution of all strategic and tactical objectives, driving the projects to its intended goals while maintaining a vigilant eye on the quality and efficiency. So, accomplishments with more, Christopher has accomplishments with more than a decade of experience in the information security domain. Christopher brings a wealth of knowledge and a track record of success to his current role as principal at Arbor. Christopher's deep seated background in cloud security is a testament to his comprehensive technical prose. This expertise, honed over years of hands-on experience, now guides Arbios clients through the complexity of securing their cloud infrastructures. Christopher has many certifications. He has studied computational economics at the University of California, Santa Barbara. His current certifications include Certified AWS Security Specialist and Certified Information Security Professional, that is CISSP. He held prestigious industry certifications such as Qualified Security Assessor, Payment Application Qualified Security Assessor, QSA for point-to-point encryption, and PA/QSA for point-to-point encryption, which is P2PE. These accreditations underscore Christopher's capabilities to navigate clients through the challenging landscape of compliance in information security. So now I would like to hand over the meeting to Christopher. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. Awesome. So good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss a topic that's both a passion and a pivotal aspect of our professional landscape. Call it kind of a working title, but we call it Architecting the Future. This journey we're embarking on today is not just about technological marvels we've created, but also about the lessons, strategies, and vision that guide us towards tomorrow. Let's explore together how understanding our past, leveraging our present, and anticipating our future can drive us towards unprecedented innovation. Today's workloads span multiple specialized fields that have to address various regulations. And this means that you have various kinds of individuals that specialize in their particular area of operations: networking, systems, security, applications, front end stuff, back end stuff, storage stuff. I think you guys all get the point. In order to understand how to manage this complexity we have to deal with today, I need to take you on a brief look at how operations has evolved over the years. So, in the early days of computing, machines filled entire rooms, requiring manual intervention for basic operations. During this mainframe era, a lot of management was at a physical layer: vacuum tubes, tapes. The became a single rack. They were sleek, they were sexy, and they were still relatively easy to manage. Most large organizations would have many of these, and they were much easier to maintain, and each server generally served a single function. Then the world got bigger. We had a global connected economy. The need to have interconnected systems across the globe became a thing. We had to start to tackle regulations and serve different content based on the country that it was being served in. So we're at the rise of the co-location data center, both for disaster recovery and for the ability to drive traffic as close to the edge as possible. This complexity evolved, and it started to become very clear that it would soon become impossible to manage by hand. Engineers had to fly to location to manage these servers, or you had to synchronize teams across various time zones. Additionally, during this time, if you took a look at the resources that were being consumed, you would generally see 10 to 20% of the CPU, maybe 5% of the memory capacity being leveraged. Then came the hypervisor, virtualization. Instead of a single application on a single server, you're able to virtualize the operating system. And there was an isolation layer that did not really exist up until this point. So now you can isolate multiple systems on the same machine and take advantage of those additional resources that were previously untouched. This led to a dramatic increase of systems. We went from thousands to tens of thousands overnight. Now you're running these systems on shared hardware, and there was a tremendous reliance on isolation at the OS layer. This required a huge team of people. Automation went from a nice thing to becoming a requirement. To add to the complexity of this new world, cloud started to become a thing. Configuration management tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt were developed to manage the complexity of an individual system, virtual machine, or server, and infrastructure tools such as Terraform and CloudFormation allowed organizations to manage the complexity of modern infrastructure. This allowed engineers to use declarative code that allowed consistent enforcement across all systems and networks. Each of these steps were not just a leap in technology, but also a leap in our approach to solving problems. Software engineering, for example, mirrored this journey, having to move from static to dynamic websites and adapting the ever-changing demands of users and businesses alike. This adaptability, learning from both success and failure, has been key in shaping the resilient dynamic infrastructure that we rely on today. The data center evolution is a testament to our ingenuity and foresight. What began as a colossal machine consuming entire floors has transitioned into cloud services that are both omnipresent and invisible, serving millions globally without the physical footprint of their ancestors. Looking at you, AS400s. This journey from physical to virtual exemplifies not just a change in scale, but a fundamental shift in how we perceived and interacted with data. It's a narrative of reducing complexity, enhancing flexibility, and most importantly, democratizing access to computing power. So let me share a turning point in my career that underscores the transformative power of codification. So I was a QSA. For those not familiar, a QSA is an auditor for PCI compliance standard. So if a business is accepting credit card payments large enough, their banks will eventually come and force them to have an independent third-party audit and ensure that their environment is aligned with this PCI standard. And the standard has over 300 controls that are required to be validated on an annual basis. So I was working with a client that had about 300 data centers around the world, and I was having dinner the night before, and this vulnerability came up with glibc. So it was CVE 2015 235. It was also called Ghost because we were giving vulnerabilities really cool names back then, and it was essentially a buffer overflow. Now I knew that this organization, was an open source type organization, and within PCI you had standards and requirements. So if you had a critical vulnerability, you had to patch your systems within 30 days. Now, having 300 data centers across the world, I was really curious to dig into, what their proposed solution was to actually remediate this vulnerability. So I come in the next morning, and what I saw was nothing short of what I found at the time to be revolutionary. So my client's team introduced me to a configuration management tool called Salt. And so this client having hundreds of data centers across the world, something that I probably would have imagined that we would have had to push back their compliance dates for, or help them communicate that they were in the process of remediating this. I think it was a CVSS score of 10 at the time, but they were able to remediate it within 48 hours, which really blew my mind. And right after that day, I went home and I started to codify my lab. And it's really hard for me to kind of point at anything that made such a large difference in my workflows. Like many of you, I'm sure you have a whole laundry list of technologies that you want to explore and that you want to dive into. And for my use case, break, and understand why it broke and look for vulnerabilities. And to set up my lab, it used to take me a weekend. Now, having put everything into Salt and used Packer to build my VMs, and I think I used Proxmox at the time for like the hypervisor, I was able to stand up my lab in less than a minute. And this was huge for me. I was able to explore more technology, dive into more things, and make those repetitive tasks just automated, which was amazing. So getting back to the presentation, we live in a world where tooling is no longer an optional thing, and there needs to be a strategy to enforce consistency across these complex environments. And time again, that we see organizations adopting is to codify their environments. And when we talk about codification, I'm talking about capturing that routine, the process, or configuration in a form that allows it to be repeatable and scalable. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this at a high level. Code can be declarative or it could be imperative. Think of imperative code as the traditional procedural object level programming like C, C++, Java. This way, the code gives a step-by-step process on how to accomplish the end state. What's neat with declarative code, we specify the desired end state. Hey, this is the SSH config that I want. This is what I want PAMD to look like. And we let the tooling decide the best way to achieve this end state, regardless of how it gets there. I really love this. Not only is it easier to digest and validate for security and compliance reasons, it means I'm not locked into a single platform and that I have the capability to spread my resources across various kinds of infrastructure. Some of the more recent stuff that we're working on is, mesh type systems where we create a common middleware and we spread it across on-prem, AWS, Azure. And so the developers just need to know, hey, what's the edge that they need to push this to, and everything else is handled. It's beautiful. So some of the advantages to doing things as code and things that organizations tend to do when they embrace things once they start becoming complex. So the first advantage is being able to lint the code. So once the code is captured, a linting allows an organization to enforce their own opinion on that code. This is commonly done in the form of static analysis and alerting. Now, I know what all of you are thinking. Oh boy, static analysis. It's just a whole bunch of false positives. And I would say probably up until the last 2 years or so, it was something that was ran but not really paid attention to. Organizations tend to lean more towards dynamic analysis. That's, hey, let's review what it's doing as the application's actually running. So with static analysis, organizations are able to go as little or as complex as they feel necessary. And that analysis of code leads to linting, which allows organizations to enforce consistency as their workload matures over time. This is what we have found to be a key component for adoption. The next big benefit is collaboration. So once code has been captured and all teams are speaking the same language in a common format, we can then integrate that into our CI/CD tooling to automatically build a workflow that works for collaboration. And this is a huge driving force for adoption. With the increased complexity in our environments, it's difficult for a single person to reason about that environment alone. Collaboration provides checks and balances, keeps teams on the same page, and version controlled infrastructure drastically helps manage security and compliance requirements. This enables things like separation of duties. That's also a PCI requirement. These tools have a lot of modular options, salt states and pillars, chef recipes. There is an intrinsic layer of isolation that allows us to define our problem within our respective domain very specifically. We found that the world doesn't, the world's problems don't need to be solved, just our tiny corner of it. And I joke about this with clients all the time. You need to treat workloads like Legos, picking the right yellow Lego with 8 dots to fit that particular workload's needs. And once all is captured, my favorite thing to do is start being able to model that output. This allows us to take these abstract concepts like infrastructure and networking and input them into something that allows us to interrogate our design. For example, Terraform allows you to output into a dot file, and you could take this open source format and leverage academic tools to 3D visualize the world that was just built. Now comes the fun stuff. We're seeing a cultural movement where mature teams are shifting their roles from putting out fires to causing fires in order to understand their environment's weaknesses. Netflix coined this term as chaos engineering, and these teams can be confident in their workload's ability because the workload has been designed to be scalable, repeatable, and there are no nuances from one environment to another. This consistency fosters confidence, and security teams are analyzing their environments using tools like TensorFlow and operations. They're able to analyze logs and metrics to pick out that needle in a haystack. And remember that these environments are now multiple orders of magnitude larger than they used to be, which means there's a lot of logs to digest. And we've seen this come to fruition. AWS has like GuardDuty, which analyzes DNS logs. And it'll tell you things like, hey, we see this administrator logging in from a location that's, they've never logged in with before, or we're seeing this bad IP rep come in and we're immediately going to block the traffic. And then we could set up step functions behind there. The next thing we're seeing evolutions in is distributed tracing with technologies like OpenTelemetry. This helps teams understand the flow from the internet to the microservice. And this can point things out like a bad deployment, but can also be leveraged to understand if there's a malicious individual within the environment. So codification isn't just about efficiency, it's about collaboration, security, and innovation. By embracing declarative code, teams can seamlessly collaborate across projects, breaking down barriers and accelerating progress. The synergy enables us to implement proactive security measures, adopt practices like chaos engineering, and leverage advanced analytics for deeper insights. It's about transforming the way that we work, ensuring that our infrastructures are not just robust, but also adaptable, resilient, and they're ahead of the curve. And the way that this kind of translates over to the real world is, when we're doing a review, the classical approach would be, hey, you're going to give me, and we're going to take a look at this workload that's hosted in AWS, and you're going to give us security audit access. And what we see that's still done is an individual kind of go through CIS, which is a industry standard hardening methodology, and they'll check IAM, they'll check S3, they'll take a look at all the different types of resources that are actually being consumed, and then they'll pump out a report, and the report will give them manual recommendations in terms of how to remediate, say S3 not being encrypted with CMK, which is a customer managed key. And we go back to a lot of these compliance requirements requiring things like rotation of keys on an annual basis. So when you're making these recommendations, I always find that it's important to speak the language that our clients are speaking, kind of going back to that declarative code, and speak from operational context. The issue when you're providing manual instructions to resolve an S3 bucket is, hey, this client has 1,000 accounts. Are they even provisioning these manually, or is it being done with a tool like Terraform or CloudFormation? So, the exec teams will cut up the executive summary, they'll kind of circulate it around themselves, and then the tactical remediation will be given to a developer team. And I found that every layer of translation that needs to occur from the report to the actual implementation, any layer of translation requires significant effort, right? So this may look like a simple remediation, but now they need to do it through 1,000 accounts. They also need to interpret the 20 different steps that you gave them back to Terraform. So if we're able to speak their language, they're able to push out these fixes quicker, they're able to stay compliant, and they're able to do what really is their role and keep their organization, competitive within their respective industry. So yeah, doing things as code is huge, and it's been a huge game changer for my career. Another story that I wanted to share was, back going to PCI. In the very beginning of the report on compliance, or we call it a ROC, it asks you to talk about your sampling methodology, because you have to go in, you have to check these systems for hardening against their procedures and against, industry standard hardening methodologies. And, even today, a lot of people will go back to COBIT, and that is, hey, we want to break these systems into unique sample sets and just sample, 10% of that environment. And when we saw the shift go from hundreds to tens of thousands of systems, you just kind of got this uneasy feeling that you weren't covering enough. So a lot of the time now that we spend is actually looking at code. And this gives us the confidence, because when we build these workloads, we want to keep people away from production. We want to keep people away from data. And when you're analyzing the code that's used to actually provision, you're taking a couple steps back down the pipeline. You're able to show them, hey, this is where the misconfiguration is actually occurring, and kind of take it from there. So it's a game changer. And so instead of just sampling 10% of an environment, you're sampling the entire environment, which I think is definitely, the way that we need to kind of go about things with how complex everything has gotten. So I know we just covered a lot as we've been going through this presentation, on this journey of architecting the future. It's paved with lessons from our past, innovations of present, and the vision of the future. And it's a continuous cycle of learning, adapting, and innovating. And I encourage you all to reflect on how these insights apply to your work, your challenges, and your aspirations. And let's leverage the lessons of the past and the tools of today to build a future that's not just responsive, but visionary. So thank you for joining me on this brief little journey, and let's continue to architect the future together.
Awesome. Thank you, Christopher. It was an awesome session. So would you like to do some Q&A with the participants?
Oh, yeah. I see a couple of them here. Yeah. In terms of the slides, I'm not a big, I call it slideshow karaoke kind of guy. I'm more the content. So maybe at some point I'll build out more slides, but more, I'd like to kind of dive into the topics at hand and, not read off the slides. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So I believe that's the end for today's session. If anyone else has any questions for Christopher, please go ahead.
Yeah, I got a couple of minutes. We could hang out, and don't be shy.
Yeah. Or if you want to have a direct chat or a voice call, just raise your hand and you can have a talk.
Yeah, codification in short term. So when we're talking about codification, we're talking about, capturing that routine and that process and making it repeatable. So for example, I go back to the cloud because that's kind of like, a large part of the area that I work in for right now. So say you have a storage S3 bucket, and the way people would used to really manage these S3 buckets is they would log into the console, click on the link that says create an S3 bucket, and then from there, you'd have to do things like, hey, encrypt this S3 bucket, generate a policy, and apply whatever, the organizational procedure was. So it took a very long time to actually process and actually perform. And as things scaled, it just wasn't practical to manage. So now what most organizations do is they'll use something like Terraform, it's an open source product by HashiCorp. And if you take a look at, or if you search Terraform registry, you could click on the particular technology that you're interacting with. So you can see GCP, you can see Azure, you can see AWS, and you could search for the technology component that you want to deploy. So in this case, it would be S3. And then there's a standard structure to how you want to configure this S3 bucket. So instead of taking, 5-10 minutes to actually deploy it manually, you can deploy it within seconds. The same goes for the network or any other technology component that exists. So it's all about capturing that routine and process and making it repeatable.
Awesome. Any other questions you guys have? Please go ahead and post it in Q&A. We have another question.
Yeah, it depends. So when it comes to AI, typically when we see organizations talking about AI, it's typically, hey, they have some type of API that they're interacting with OpenAI with, so like ChatGPT, right? So in codification, you may have your workload, and within the code, you're probably using like AWS, their CDK, to call that API. So it doesn't really make it different that much. Where we would see a difference is as organizations start to run their own AI ML type workloads internally. And so the big process that would have is, you'd probably be using a tool like Cloud Init or Packer. And this would make sure that the system that's being deployed within the cloud environment is repeatable. So whatever controls you're putting in to the workload to control, for example, like access management to your system, making sure you don't put it into a training mode or what have you, that would be codified and then easily auditable by your compliance teams or security teams to make sure that, hey, this is the expected end state. We know that it's not going to change because of these controls that are actually enforced. So two different ways. But it's still super early in the journey. But right now, it's really controlling the endpoint the systems are talking to.
So there's another question: how Red Canary is too useful?
Yeah, so Red Canary is not something that I've jumped into too much. I was actually going to talk about this briefly, but I don't have. I'm not usually managing these infrastructures, so I'm kind of taking a look. From what I understand, Red Canary is more for deployment. So that example that I gave you with my one client, they were using Canary, Coal Mine, I forgot what the actual term is, to roll those updates out across the world. So they would make the change to those systems as code, and instead of pushing them all out as one, if we're talking about the same thing here, instead of just pushing it out to the 300 data centers around the world, they would roll them out per region to ensure that there wasn't any downtime and that they could ensure that they've didn't break anything during the deployment process. But again, Red Canary is not something I've had too much hands-on experience with.
Awesome. We have another question asking future of cloud security and auditing and compliance.
Yeah, I think the future of cloud. So where I think that it's going is you have a lot of these cloud posture management tools. With our organization, we're partners and MSSP partners with organizations like Orca.security. And what was really nice about these systems is they took away a lot of the basic foundation level work. So like when AWS launches like 900 new services in a year, my goal is to be up to date on those services, know how to deploy them in like a compliance or a security state. And I find that, when you have to go back and take a look at, IAM, identity, S3 configurations, that just chews up a whole lot of time. So with tools like Orca, you're able to kind of get a snapshot of that those types of things that would take up a lot of time and allow you to focus on really what's most important to our clients. And that would be, hey, we just, when everybody migrated from when they were going to EKS, which is the managed Kubernetes instance that AWS provides. It was, hey, let's make sure that we understand the networking aspect of it, how the applications are segmented, those type of things. So it really helped us focus on the future and new technologies that are coming up and about. And when it comes to auditing and compliance, yeah, it definitely helps out with compliance. Proofpoint, not too familiar with. I'm usually not a product guy. We kind of limit our partnerships to very few companies. I'm more of a believer of like, hey, how does this actually function, right? With like IDS, intrusion detection systems, intrusion protection systems. How do they actually analyze the traffic, do their packet captures, perform their analysis? And then that would apply to, Proofpoint used to do, or they still do IDS, IPS. But when it comes to all the vendors, definitely not a master with vendors on my end, just the core technology.
Okay, awesome. So we have another question. What about Proofpoints?
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. Not too familiar with where they're currently at. Let me just quickly Google. If you ask one of my buddies who's a rep for them, he'd probably be very angry at me. Email protection. I think that stuff is super, when it comes to Proofpoint, kind of like, I don't think you could really codify their actual deployments. So what I would typically do with technologies, if our clients want to adopt them, is I would tell them, hey, let's look at the Terraform registry, right? And you would see this with like Cloudflare versus like another vendor. And what the registry let me to do and see is like, hey, there's 10,000 people that were interested in this last month versus 10 million people. So it kind of gave me the idea of the direction that developers were actually going. And my big thing is I could think that it's a great product, but then I've come back and then my clients haven't logged into it for a year. So really I wait for them to share me the things that they love. And that's how I came across Orca was we were doing a lot of M&A type work and one of my clients introduced me to it. And I found that it was, a great tool. In terms of internships, we'll probably be opening up an internship here in the next couple of months, probably around the summer session. And the big thing we look for beginners is, hey, people that are kind of, self-motivated, that want to dive into this stuff, head first and, really just enjoy interacting with the stuff as much as I do.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I believe.
I think there was one more with the transform code. What I would do is, again, I'm not a partner with HashiCorp. We're too small at this point. But what helped me out the most was if you take a look at, I think it's HashiCorp. If you do like Terraform tutorials or HashiCorp Learn, I think it's called HashiCorp Learn. Terraform Learn. They have a whole bunch of modules that'll walk you through the very basics of like what Terraform is, how to manage its states, to more complex things on like, hey, how do we do multi-cloud type deployments? So I think it's developer.hashicorp.com. I would start with Terraform. Terraform's so big that even AWS, their product is called CloudFormation, but even they started adopting Terraform just because there's so much traction behind it. So I would definitely take a look at their tutorials first. They're free. And now they even have it so you can like spin up like a system, on their website right there. So, it's even easier to learn now than ever. Oh, there's a whole lot.
One of the participants wants an opinion from you about IT auditor.
Yeah. And I saw, do they still use Vagrant? I think, I still see a lot of Vagrant, especially, this is a tool where you could really like, especially on the pen testing side where you need, it's like, hey, you're testing an exploit. You want to deploy a system that is exactly like, the system that you want to pop. So we see it used in that context. Also, we've been seeing it used more from like a cost optimization perspective. So instead of testing these things out in a live cloud environment, you could virtualize it locally and kind of take it from there. Any cloud security programs like this one. What I do from a cloud security perspective, what I would recommend, AWS, and Azure and GCP have it too, but you could tell that the technical writers on AWS really like what they're doing. And you could look up any technical component on AWS. So if you do the developer guides for like S3 or for VPC, on the left-hand side, there's security considerations, and they break down, hey, these are the things you should look for as you're kind of building out these technology components. HashiCorp does the same thing for theirs. They threat model them, tell you what the risks are. So I would definitely, click on those security tabs. Typically, when we are taking a look at products like Jenkins is one that we constantly come across, we find that during the deployment of a Jenkins system, the people that are deploying it follow every single step, but then they stop at the security tab. So it's like definitely take a look at those security tabs, and that's where I would look from like a security program perspective. IT auditor is a good role to take up if I want to seek something in the GRC and compliance. Yeah, it kind of takes hand. Yeah, I like IT audit. The reason I like PCI is because it's very technical. So you take a look at a lot of the standards, they're very like high level, right? You need to comply with like a government request to provide these logs. So it's like, hey, figure out how you're going to do this. But what's nice about PCI is they have the control. They tell you how to audit it, and then they talk about the intent, why this control needs to be in place. And then what you'll see is it's like, hey, a lot of the times organizations will cross-adopt this across various regulations because it's more aggressive than, other standards that actually exist. So yeah, definitely there. And then also we work not just with like the cloud security teams and the compliance teams, but organizations that are large enough that do have their own audit function. We've also worked with them to ensure that, hey, these new, Cloud Center of Excellence or whatever that's been adopted is living up to their actual standards. I would say that those 5 years of experience, you'll start. Yeah, I would say that I haven't looked at a lot of these like requirements for a while. I think people want that 5 years experience because that's what the CISP calls for. But I don't think it's a hard requirement. Typically, when we're interviewing, we're just looking for people that are passionate, that are willing to learn, and are that could really run with things. And I would say most organizations are like that. I think there's a lot more entry level stuff that actually exists. Even if you see that 5 years of experience, I would still apply. It's not going to be a ding on you if you don't apply. Right. And just what I would do is just get those conversations going. So, hey, this is what they're asking during these conversations. This is what I should prepare for, and kind of go from there. Yeah, I would say from a cert perspective, VTF has it. But I mean, for me, the companies that I've worked with paid for my certs because, for example, with PCI, it requires you to have a CISP, right? So that does have those 5 year experience, but now they have their associate programs, which I haven't looked at for a while. But they do have associate programs for PCI to kind of get into that space where you don't need that huge background. And there's a mentor that kind of like brings you through that process. So for me, I got hired at an organization, my first security engineering job, they paid for my OSCP. When I got into consulting, they paid for my CISP, and on the audit side for PCI, for example, you can't just pay for it yourself. It has to be sponsored by an organization. So when I left my company and started this company, you have to actually go through the whole process again. It's not transferable. So you have a lot of those different type requirements. But I would take a look at if I were going to start anywhere. AWS, they have a security specialty. That's something that I would maybe prepare for because probably we see 90% of the things that we do are in AWS. And the security specialty is a more difficult exam. When they say like they recommend, but the path to get to the AWS specialty, security specialty is very defined. So as you're kind of like working your way, and their tests aren't really expensive, and they last for years. So those are that's probably a path that I would go down. I think AI is great. I know like a year ago when I was going to the local security meetups, it was all like boogeyman AI stuff. But there's obviously traction behind it. There's risks that are involved. And I think part of cybersecurity is, hey, understanding those risks and making sure, their organizations are staying secure and compliant. And I think the security, I find it as something where I could dive into something quick. The effort that would take me to kind of focus on like something small, I can make that repetitive. I could, analyze it against AI. So I think AI is is huge. And instead of just looking for that needle in the haystack, it's able to find it quick, right? So Netflix had a good discussion about it with their chaos engineering. They said, hey, when an incident used to come up, they used AWS's tool at the time was Margarita Shotgun. And so what would happen is, you'd wake up your security engineer at 2 a.m. They would spend their morning gathering all this information, and then they would make a decision at the 8 a.m. meeting. Instead, what they're able to do with AI is they're able to automate that process. So something gets triggered, Margarita Shotgun gets popped off. It's able to collect all the information necessary. So yeah, you're not waking up your security engineer in the middle of the night unless it's something really critical. And they're able to take a look at the data that would have otherwise been manually collected and make that decision then and there, which is, it's huge with cybersecurity. Oh, like SSH port. It's been a while since I've looked at that. If you're looking into like SSH port forwarding and stuff like that, I think it just really depends on the context. It's like, do you need to expose just like a management port? Do you need to expose like a web service? But take a look at OSCP, offensive security. OSCP is a very difficult test, but they have an entry course called PWK, which is like working with Linux and stuff like that. And I would take a look at that. The PWK is a great course. And they really kind of get into, it's something that I revisit, even though I'm very familiar with Linux. I still revisit like when I want to do some more advanced stuff within an OS. So the trend that we've seen with AWS versus Azure versus GCP. So a lot of startups we find use GCP. I think it's because, hey, you had a lot of Kubernetes workloads. They created Kubernetes. But I find a lot of people are on AWS. There was a big push to Azure years ago when Azure was giving away a lot of free compute and stuff. But then I found a lot of organizations were kind of migrating back over to AWS and not getting as heavy in Azure. So I would say probably AWS. Also, just the way that the technical documentation is on AWS from my experience. I haven't looked at the Azure documentation for maybe a year, but it was always dead links and referencing old material. On the Azure side, where AWS, again, they just put a tremendous amount of effort into their technical documentation. And you could tell just, it looks like a wall of text, but it flows really well. So I would probably lean more on AWS. I also believe that the AWS certs are significantly cheaper. So if you want to dip your toe or go full in, probably 90% of the orgs that we see are using AWS. They shouldn't be thousands of dollars. The security specialty that I took was $300 when I took it. I think some of the what's it called? The other AWS cert, which is like the solutions architect and stuff like that, were also between $100 and $300. I think if you're paying thousands of dollars, it may be going through a third party. But yeah, they shouldn't cost that much. I think with any technology too, right, there's always that fear that even like if you look at like machine computers when they came out and how many jobs were like eliminated, or even automation, right? When you're looking at cloud formation and stuff like that, there's always something deeper to dive into, and these things make the security side of it repeatable. I'm not familiar with PNPT. I have to look into it. I like Hack the Box. Hack the Box is pretty cool. So like before that existed, you had to run your own VMs and stuff like that locally. And then, kind of set them up to be able to be exploited. And then the evolution of that, there was another company that was called CTF 365 about 10 years ago. But, the servers were run by like volunteers. So somebody would like exploit it and then you'd have to wait for them to like reset it. Hack the Box, I just started playing with maybe like last year. And from like just, hey, if it's something that you're into, Hack the Box. There's also ctftime.org. I think is the website. I could be wrong, but that shows you open CTFs, capture the flags that are available. And I would take a look at those. Yeah, but they're great. I haven't looked at their certs. I think their certs, I briefly looked at like their academy, I think it's called, and it was pretty expensive. I could be wrong. But I do like their core offering quite a bit. And I also love how it kind of gives you like the context. So like if you're dry and haven't done this stuff for like quite a couple of years, it's like, hey, this is what we're looking at. Here's, the guides are great on Hack the Box. Yeah. So if you take a look, we haven't put up a jobs page yet because we're still like our company's been around for about a year. But if you look at arbor.com, on the bottom, you'll see there's the security.txt file, and that has our recruiting info. So I think that's like jobs at Arbor or something like that would be where to reach out, and we could kind of put you into a folder to contact once we do open up internships. Again, like when it comes to certs, I always took it from a consulting perspective when I'd be hiring people. Again, I would look for somebody that just was like familiar and they wanted to learn more. I never, wanted to put like a cert in front of it, right? In my field, it didn't require a cert, so we weren't really looking for certs. The certs were a plus, but yeah, I'm not too familiar with the Security Plus. I had a couple of people that I hired as interns and then brought them on as consultants. Like, they went from interns to consultants and they had Security Pluses and they seemed to have enough information to like hit the ground running. So it seemed like it was a great cert from my perspective. Oh yeah, I mean the courses are where they get you, but I agree. Yeah, the courses when you go through those. But what I would have my teams do, I don't know if it still exists, but a Cloud Guru was great. I think it's now like Linux something. So they would use Cloud Guru to study and not pay thousands of dollars for it. Because anytime you do like an in-person course or anything like that, you have your hotel costs and that type of stuff. And we didn't have the budget to spend that on people. So any of those courses were pretty expensive, but like with the security specialty, you can just download the guide. And then I think like at the time I paid $50 to take a pre-test, and then I paid for the actual test itself. So yeah, you're correct. The training, if the formal training can be very expensive from there. But the way that I handled it is I would let them expense a Cloud Guru or whatever it's called now, and then we would do study groups, and then we would pay for their tests. But yeah, that's very similar to PCI. PCI, it's 30,000 for the company to register. It's 5,000 for each person because they have to go on site to actually do the training. So any of those courses are super expensive. But check out a Cloud Guru or they're like Linux something now. But Cloud Guru was great, and that seemed to be a good path. The AWS security specialty. Now that's like if you have, they say 5 years of experience. It's definitely 5 years of experience. A funny story about the security specialty is the first reInvent that I was at, the entire class failed and they had to go back and actually rework the test because it was too difficult. But I do like the security specialty. It's not a checkbox one. There's policy questions on there and it does require you to have like an operational knowledge on it. But the steps to get to security specialty, and they've made it better every single year, are clear, and they do kind of add that context to it. So I think it was like the solutions architect and whatever the foundational level one is. I don't know THM. I'll have to check it out. Yeah. Contact us. I don't have my info on here, but I'm Christopher at Arbor. Again, if you go to arbor.com and you do the security.txt, all of our contact info is down there, and definitely feel free to reach out. Or on LinkedIn, if you look me up on LinkedIn. Yeah, I don't know about like for me, my big thing, like when I got into it was what actually got me into the security field. And I didn't even have it on my resume because, I was going down like my initial route was like pen tester, right? But it was just a working knowledge of Linux. I remember being on the phone with the VP of security at the time, and he's like, Linux. He was like, why isn't that not on your resume? And I was like, I thought it was a prereq. I just didn't have that on there. And Linux, just having a working knowledge of Linux, what I would take a look at is Linode. Linode is like they used to sell. They do like virtual private servers. They have and DigitalOcean. They have great hardening your server courses that are pretty easy to do. So they walk you through hardening PAMD, removing root access. Those type of things were things that we would look for a base level of experience. So taking a look at those hardening guides and just standing up like your own server or having a working knowledge on how to harden your own server is a great first step. In terms of projects, yeah, I don't know. I didn't really do any projects before. Before it was just running my own servers and have a knowledge of hardening them and kind of going from there. Red teaming or pen testing, not really a clear roadmap. I think it's getting more and more clear. Hack the Box is great, but it's expensive for what you guys were telling me. What I would do is like capture the flags are great. So you have a lot of Jeopardy style capture the flags. So it's like, hey, I want to do cryptography, I want to do system hardening, or what have you. Those were really good from like an experience perspective, and then it would also translate to like those interview skills in terms of like background and what you've worked on. And then offensive security, their PWK courses and stuff like that. I think offensive security was still a couple $100. When I did the OSCP, I think it was like 600 or 1,000. But that came with like 90 days and like all the training material and stuff like that. So really going down that red teaming route, I think OSCP probably is some of the best certs out there. In terms of auditing cloud networks, when it comes to auditing, one is like having a working knowledge of like the cloud infrastructures and common things like VPCs, S3s, EC2s, those type of things, right? So you could typically, create an AWS account for free, right? It's not until you start putting compute out there, and even then, when you put compute out there, they have EC2s that are like free tier EC2s until you get to a certain point. So for me, it was really building the environments, not just auditing them. And so as I would build the environments, I would take a look at things like CIS, the Center for Internet Security. And from there, what you're able to do is take a look at the hardening methodologies and how you should be hardening the systems, and then apply those standards. And I think that helps from a architecture perspective. Yeah, Pluralsight's around. Yeah, Cloud Guru. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that they were with Pluralsight now. Yeah. I would say just be ready to learn, to be on the market, in the industry. Just be ready to learn. It's like never ending. I enjoy it. It can definitely be exhausting, but it's never ending. Like this codification journey, I thought it was going to be like a couple of months, but it's been, years that went from like Terraform to Cloud Init to just like always building and hardening things and making it better, then seeing how my clients are doing things and then learning about new tooling. So I would just say, have a passion, because, there's a lot of stuff that you can kind of serial specialize in, but definitely having that foundational systems and network knowledge help out. Oh, I don't know. On the Android side, I never did mobile pen testing and stuff. Yeah, yeah, we used to always have like from a RAD perspective, PHP type systems, and then we would have like the shells on those PHP systems. You would come and be like, oh, this system's been popped. But on the Android side, I'm unsure. Linode, yeah, it's exactly how you spelled it. Linode. I haven't used Attack IQ before, so I'm unsure.
I'm responding to those questions.
Oh, okay, good. I'm just kind of scrolling.
Yes.
Which one? I'm unsure. The AWS CCP Certified Cloud Practitioner. Yeah, I think that's the foundation. It used to be an optional test. I don't know if it's still an optional, but I think the Cloud Practitioner, that's what I would have my interns do after a couple of months, and then they would do the solutions architect, and then from there they would work their way towards the security specialty. Yeah, definitely add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect. It does. So so when it comes to like industry hardening methodologies, I have two experiences. One, my clients would tell me that they harden according to NIST, which is great. But I never found that anybody actually hardened according to NIST, because it's like an 800-line Excel sheet and nobody actually went through it. Maybe if it was on the more Fed side. Instead, what organizations would typically do is use the Center for Internet Security, CIS. You could download those for free, and they don't just have cloud. They have, hey, if you're running Red Hat, if you're running Oracle Linux, if you're running Office 365, they have hardening standards for everything. And what's great about their hardening standards, it's not just an Excel sheet with 800 lines of, hey, make sure this is turned on. They tell it's a weighted standard. So you don't have to do it all. It really comes down to what the organization, what their tolerance is and what their hardening guides actually stipulate. But also what's nice about it is it's like, hey, this is what you're checking. This is how you check it. This is why you're checking it. And this is the importance of this control. And then if if your audit comes back with this response, this is how you remediate. So I think CIS is great. It definitely does transfer to on-prem as well. Maybe not PowerShell. I would say like a majority of the systems we run into, especially like in the cloud, is all like AWS Linux AMIs, which are all kind of like, well, they used to run Fedora. I don't know what they're running now, or what version of like Red Hat that they're doing now, or if it's even the same. But I would say Linux for sure. PowerShell, I think it's definitely good to learn, and you'll use it more and more as it's kind of like standardized. But if you're going down a pen testing route, definitely PowerShell. Have that, just understand PowerShell more, just like not navigate it, function with it, leverage it. I think, if you look at like Kali Linux, they have a bunch of PowerShell modules as well. But yeah, a lot of pen testing. I know they leverage PowerShell, and I know a lot of clients they disable PowerShell, or they say they disable PowerShell. But definitely Linux for cloud security, just because probably 95%, 98% of the stuff we run into is a Linux AMI or some variant of Linux. Even like on the Windows side of the house, if they're running Azure, they're running Azure AD to handle the federation. But even then, you're not messing with the actual system itself unless you're using like their cloud shell or something like that. So I think definitely Linux is the route to go. And even as I've gone through interviews over the years, that's the feedback that I've generally gotten and seen is there's not a lot of working Linux knowledge. I'm not sure about the cert after this course.
They are referring to the attack IQ.
Oh, got it.
They are mixing up the questions.
Oh, got it. Yeah. I'm starting to get more pen testing stuff, which is okay. Okay, Michael here, Hack the Box, SOC analysis, pen testing, learning pass, AWS certified solutions architect, security specialty are good. CompTIA, Security Plus, I heard is good. OSCP, I like. CEH, I mean, I don't know what it looks like now. Before, it was kind of like a checkbox thing. So I know we didn't put a lot of weight on it when we were actually hiring, but definitely the CompTIA Security Plus and the OSCP for sure. Yeah. Honestly, for me, it would be, you know, uh, in terms of what certs to look for, I would work my way towards an OSCP. And probably if I started now, it'd probably be Hack the Box and OSCP. I think there's like the free Hack the Box, then there's the $20 a month. You don't need to like add all the modules and stuff like that. And then I would save up for the PWK. And even with OSCP, if you don't pass the test, you still have access to all the content. And I think that content's invaluable. It's like, hey, how do we work with Metasploit and Kali Linux and just in a basic Linux environment? I think that core, the money that you spend and the materials that you get are worth it, even if you don't do the OSCP test. I find myself going back and, taking a look at it constantly. Yeah, I love security engineering. Yeah, back then it was, hey, the systems teams would build out their systems, but I was responsible for all the security tooling. So it was making sure like span ports were configured, Snort Splunk. If you wanted to get into it, I would take a look at, there's a free tool, not a free tool, but an OS that you could download. I run it at home here. It's called Security Onion. And what's really nice is before you would have to install Snort, you would feed Snort, which is like IDS, IPS. You would feed that into, a Splunk or probably like Elk. And then, it was a lot of configuration. What's nice about Security Onion is they pull all that configuration together. So it runs Securata, Snort. You could do the Snort premium stuff with it, which is like $30 a year for like the advanced, the advanced telemetry that comes from it. But the Elk stack is all pre-configured. So it's like, hey, you don't have to download a PCAP and put it into Wireshark. You could click on it. You could see the HTML output of the actual PCAP. You could see where the traffic actually flowed from. So if you want to dabble in security engineering, I would definitely take a look at Security Onion. It's free and it's a great OS, and they're cloud-based and you can run it at home as well. Let's see. I don't know how much time we have, but I got on my end probably about 5 minutes before I need to jump on another call. So let me just go through some of these questions here. Books that you would recommend. There is, it's been a while. I mean, when I was coming up, it was like Hacking Exposed and stuff like that. I don't know how those books look now, especially with all the free testing content. There is a good book, if you give me 1 second. It is called Red Team Field Man. Yeah, there's a book called Black Hat GraphQL. which I've been into. The other one for pen testing is the Red Team Field Manual, is a great book. And then there's another book that they published, but I'm forgetting the name. But definitely check out the Red Team Field Manual. And there's also a Blue Team Field Manual if you're kind of looking down the SOC side of the house. Yeah, there's volunteer organizations. So if you have like a local OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project, I think they just changed the name last year, but it's called OWASP, CSA Cloud Security Alliance. Those are great organizations, stuff like that. So try Hack Me. I've heard good things about, but I haven't had any experience. In terms of a learning path for Active Directory, I would take a look at CIS again, and just what I would do is I would, because with on the PADSS side, you had to simulate an environment. So we would virtualize like Windows Server, run our own domain controllers. So I would practice standing up your own domain controllers and then hardening them according to CIS, making sure like NTLM's off, those type of things. And then that'll walk you through hardening and why you're actually hardening the environment. And then, when you want to get more advanced, you could cross-check it with a standard like PCI compliance, because that'll go into like, okay, you've hardened it, but you need to make sure that these X controls are in place on these types of systems. I think it comes down to the organization in terms of the what the roles and responsibilities are between an analyst and an engineer. From an engineer perspective, I was responsible for making sure that the systems and the security tooling on the system was actually functioning, but I also was played an analyst role. So I'd make sure that it's functioning, but I'd also be responsible for doing the daily monitoring. A lot of organizations now, they break out that daily monitoring. So as alerts come off, the analyst will take a look. They'll do kind of like a validate that it's not like a false positive, and then they'll escalate it up the security chain. I love pen testing. If I started my career 10 years earlier, I would just do travel pen testing. I think it's neat. And then, from a pen testing, you get that foundation in place, and then you could step into different functions. And, we always talk about how like nowadays you could have like 3 different careers. I think pen testing, getting like a entry level, like an internship or something there, learning as much as you can, and then going to explore the other areas where you could specialize. I think pen testing or security engineering, I got into security engineering because of my pen testing background. So I really like pen testing. I think it's a lot of fun, and I still get a thrill every time I pop a shell. Uh, I think it's just staying on top of trends and exploits in terms of, the most secure career path. And then, we don't yeah, I heard it's like, hey, AI is not going to replace you, but the person using AI will replace you. So learn how to integrate it into your process, make sure you're not pumping it with like client data, those type of things. But still, I think, I see pen testing, people say that they do AI pen testing. I haven't looked at the stuff, but it looks like it's, like a vuln scan at the moment, plus like an additional step, right? But you have to understand a lot of nuance when it comes to pen testing and how to actually exploit and validate, and not just making a whole lot of noise. So it depends, what type of pen testing you're actually like doing. But most people don't want you to, DOS their network, as you're kind of going through it. So that's where OSCP is really great, just because it talks about like, hey, you use Wireshark, you analyze an exploit, and you see how much data is getting pumped through like one Nmap scan versus another Nmap scan, and why that's important to like an enterprise environment, right? But yeah. Okay, I'm kind of mixed up on some of the questions. I do have a hard stop in about 2 minutes, just so you guys know. But what platform do all the courses are available? The Cloud Guru one, that's what I lean on most. I don't know if they have all the courses, but I know they had a whole bunch of different paths for those AWS certs. I'm kind of, and then GRC, I think they still play, they definitely play a critical role. If you take a look at the NIST, I've only scratched the surface of the latest NIST CSF, the version 2.0 that came out. But if you take a look, they have a PDF that you can download that gives you an overview of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, and they break down how GRC and IT ops and all of that play into security. So it's definitely definitely still needed. If anything, as more technologies and stuff like that come out, you start seeing more areas to specialize in, which is exciting because it's more areas that you can kind of dive into. And that's also one of the reasons I went down the consulting side, right? Because it's like, hey, you're not just in a static environment. You get to experience how all these different organizations, big and small, handle, security. And I have a kid. So, I try to just have something in place where I can work out, like have a workout that's 30 minutes, and most of it's eating healthy or trying to eat healthy, but 30 minutes 3 times a week. When I was younger, I'd spend hours. I don't think that's practical, anymore, but definitely want to stay fit, especially if you're consulting. It's you're kind of like all over the place, and it's so easy to not do that. So I think once you get in the routine, it's easier to maintain, but I think a majority of it's just eating well. Yeah, it's Christopher Callis, Christopher P. I don't know where the chat is here.
I got your LinkedIn
You did?
profile,
Perfect.
so I can share it with the participants.
Yeah, and then this will be the last one. Then I got to hop off, guys. But it was good chatting with everybody.
Okay.
In terms of courses for GRC, I'm not sure. I've always been brought into the GRC team, but I never really got into. I'll probably have to do that on my next conversation. I've never really got into like what certs, they or courses that they actually take for it. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you,
everybody. Thank you. It was good chatting.
Thank you for this session. It was very informative. We enjoyed it a lot. So
yeah, likewise. This was great. Really appreciate the time, and yeah, hope to chat with everybody soon. Thank you. Bye.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. So guys, you should be able to see the courses that needs to be done for today. So for those who are having issues about the courses, like it's too lengthy, it's self-paced, guys, as in your pace. We are just sharing all the courses which Attack IQ is providing to VTF for free. We are just split it into day 1 and day 2 and share it with you. You can go through all the courses as per your own pace, so you don't have to worry about losing the access to the courses. And also about Slack, everyone is onboarded. Like whoever raised the tickets yesterday, we had most of them. We had added to Slack, so you should not be having that issue. I'll share Christopher's LinkedIn account link in announcement in just 2 minutes after we end this meeting. And yeah, make sure to join the same meeting at 2 a.m. Sorry, 2. Yeah. So make sure you join at 2. We will be having another meeting with Mary, you, and me. And yeah, awesome. If you have any other questions, please go ahead and let me know. Or you can raise your hands. We can have a chat to make it quick. Can you post the courses for day 2? It's already posted in Slack in the announcement channel, and I believe few of the participants have also shared it in the communication channel. So it's 2 p.m. actually, Pacific, not 2 a.m. Sorry, it's Indian. As for an Indian Standard Time, it's 3 a.m. Got confused with the timings, so it's 2 p.m. Pacific. I didn't get the link. Please check the announcement channel. I believe everyone should be able to view that. As I can see, many of you are reacting to the message in announcement channel. We cannot send the link to join the Slack channel. It's an invitation. You should have received it. Check your spam or your normal mail. You should have received a mail saying you are invited to Slack, VTF Slack, Bootcamp Slack. So if you are not able to access that, raise a ticket. But I believe you should have raised the ticket yesterday itself. But no worries, you can raise a ticket today also. We can have it resolved. We will be sharing an quiz after this meeting, so you guys can start answering that quiz. And after that, by today or tomorrow, you'll start receiving the certificates as per our system. So yeah, I think that's it, guys. Thank you for joining. I believe we can wrap up. And yeah, it was nice having Christopher also. And thank you for joining. We'll meet at 2 p.m. Pacific. So have a nice day, guys. Bye bye.